So I'm going to get started in a moment. Just wait for the door to close. So this is a bit of a strange one. This is going to be more of a non-technical discussion, which for a conference about open source software might feel a bit strange, but equally the interaction between the business units and within the technology units is quite an important part. We sit in that weird space. When you talk about ML and ML, you might be talking about two different things, machine learning or money laundering. They are both acronyms on different sides of the same spectrum. My background, though, I've been fortunate to be working in fintech since 2007. Yes, I know it did exist and we did do stuff, and I might be old, but who cares? But I have the delight of having worked in over 50 countries, launching mobile money services, launching neobanks, as well as working on other things. But I got into open source in about 2018, and as part of that journey, shared a challenge with the Gates Foundation about the problems with financial crime as they build payment systems. So I can get into more detail on that later, but I'm going to hand over to Sarah just to do a quick intro, and I'm going to pass the mic down and we can alternate. We've got two working mics, so we're just going to hand it over.
Okay, is that on? Yeah. Yep. Hello everyone, so Sarah Sinclair. I've just shocked Rob earlier, a few minutes ago, by saying I used to be a software engineer. I thought he knew that. But I quickly went over to the business side in financial services. So 30 years later, I set up a couple of businesses, one around consulting, using all the experience, having worked in banking, insurance, asset management, and fintech, mainly in areas of risk and regulation and change management. So I became a turnaround specialist, remediating many broken situations. And in one of my last assignments, someone said, the board has lost confidence in us as an organisation to do any change, to spend wisely the 150 million annual change budget. And she said, what do you think will be the reason? And I said, well, there'll be, tens or hundreds, but at the top it will be people and the gap between business and technology. And, from when I hung up my software engineering boots and went into the business, that was the case. And now 30 years on, the gap is even bigger. So that's why I felt motivated to try and do something about it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aditya Sharidukun. I lead a company called Comply, which is a spin-off from MakeCode. And traditionally, I'm a consulting guy, so my space is in consulting. And then about 6-7 years ago, started getting interested into technology, especially RegTech, as you would expect for a compliance officer. So I support banks and financial institutions in deploying regulatory technology solutions from selection to deployment and migration. And I'm like Sarah, remediation programs also, firefighting, basically how we call it. So yeah, that's been my space for a while, and Africa has been core of some of our discussions, advising fintechs in Africa around regulations, deploying their products in jurisdiction that is not local to them, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad to be here and glad to be discussing about open source and the opportunity it brings. Thank you.
Hey everyone. Yeah, it works. I'm a software engineer. 5 years ago, I guess, I met with Rob and we work on the open source transaction monitoring platform, Tazama. And right now I'm working as a site reliability engineer. It's just another fancy name of software engineering. And I work on the, high throughput systems, especially financial services and adaptive learning.
Cool. So just a quick, what is Tazama, just for a few seconds. So my background, having worked in mobile money, I worked in large corporates, so I had good budgets. I had multiple millions to build products. But invariably, you built the solution, and then you tried to go live and went, oh yeah, compliance, forgot about that. I thought that was just telco startups, then joined a challenger bank, one called Bunk. If you're in the Netherlands, you'd know who they are. But they had exactly the same problem. And I started talking to other organizations and found this was a common problem. So one of the things about compliance solutions is it's a common problem, but it's not a profit center. It's not an opportunity to thrive. So we spoke to the Gates Foundation as part of when I was working on the Mojaloop project, and we introduced them to the challenge that they're going to face, and that was the start of the Tazama journey back in 2019. Fast forward to today, Tazama is now in the Linux Foundation, is looking to be deployed across 8 countries. And I'm saying countries, not banks, but 8 physical countries are looking to deploy Tazama to detect and monitor financial crime. So my background was, we've got a shared problem, how do we do? But for the rest of you guys, your journey and where you've come through and where you've seen we have open source, why do we need it, but why can it help? So Sarah, starting with you.
Yeah, so when thinking about some of these shared challenges across the industry, so cross-industry and cross-jurisdiction, to me, open source seemed to be a bit of a no-brainer. And also, I'd seen in 2008 the financial crisis and some of the knock-on impacts of that. And as I said, before, just seeing these challenges getting bigger and bigger. And one trend I saw is a lot of consultancies and tech firms popping up to help. But actually, it seemed to make the divide even bigger. In some cases, due to the misaligned intentions, perhaps a tech firm wanting to become a unicorn, not so much caring about the business problem in hand. But regulation didn't seem to be an area that should be taken advantage of in the way it was. And so open source, to me, seems to be a way of breaking that deadlock situation and really helping innovation and progress take the forward leaps that it needs to.
I can hear that as well, with my OCD kicking in. It's all right, it's one of our panelists.
There we go. Is the alarm to remind you to come here?
She's meant to be on stage now. Oh, look, there we are. Carry on. So, yeah, please.
Yeah. So I have thought about globalization as one subject which was preached across the continent to export your products, export your services. But if you look at it from each country's or each solution's point of view, that solution is developed for you and you want to export it. For it to work everywhere, everybody needs to know exactly what that product does, what's in that product, how you did it, and all of those, which you have to explain to each country where you want to work. And that's exactly what open source means to me. So if you think about it, a product that is built with, you can talk about the technical aspects. I will talk about the challenges or the solution that it brings. Take topologies, for example, in financial crime. What we see in Europe will be different from what we'll be seeing in Africa. But the underlying solution can be adapted to these different challenges. And that's why I see open source as one of the way. And if we had open source to open data, so you can imagine a world where we have opportunity to learn a new topology. Topology meaning that this is how the criminals are working, this is how they are laundering money today. And today, someone somewhere in the world, or some people in the world, 10 of them come up with a solution, and that solution, one of them works, everybody adopts it straight away. Doing that alone, looking at what happened with various banks making same mistakes in parallel because they don't speak. So doing that alone already helps to sort of mitigate the issue, even without you investing a lot of money, which you see all of them investing. Thank you.
Maybe I can give another example. Open source help me to improve myself in the many technologies. For example, I know it's a non-technical event, but I want to give an example from open source tool like Redis or Felix. I just saw them outside. Or Valkey. So these are the tools that we use in our products. But without open source, we will never know how do they work. Every time I open an open source tool and I read their code, it is easy to use them, but it is hard how to it is hard to understand how do they work exactly. And that's why open source helped me in my career. Yeah, that's...
Cool. No, it's a good insight. People get into open source for many different reasons, and being able to see the code. Picking up on that, the challenge that we get laid at our door all the time is, but anyone can see that code, but not everyone can contribute. Toye just mentioned the typologies. We have 272 different types of financial crime catalogued. We know what those... There are more. They're variants on a theme. They exist. That's hidden away in the open source world on purpose, because we could open up some of the elements. You'll see a discussion in the AI space about open data, and we will get to that question in a short while. But just as a general question, would you want your data being made publicly available so people know how it was learned? That's the debate that we need to have in our world. So there are some interesting challenges that we're throwing out, unfortunately, because of what we're dealing with. I use the analogy of we're the most invasive service that exists. I need to know everything to make sure everything's okay. But we've talked about Tazama briefly. There are other products. So, Joseph, as part of our journey, you did a lot of research and started to find others. Can you just give people an example of other products that you've seen in the open source space? Tazama is a full solution built on open source products. The Redis comment is quite a painful one because we got hit by 3 different license changes. Abstraction is your friend if you're building open source. I'm happy to talk about that separately as well. But Joseph, other products you've come across in your journey, and then I'll pass over to the rest of the team.
I think we can talk about the Mojo Loop community, because when I joined the Tazama, I was learning, right? And Mojo Loop has a lot of open source tools. And when I see their community, it is pretty huge. I learn a lot. They have a lot of different solutions. And apart from Tazama, I couldn't find, open source transaction monitoring platform, actually. It is pretty hard. No one is building it. I don't know why. There are many commercialized solutions, but Tazama was a very unique solution. Yeah.
Yeah, I think open source, maybe most people assume that's technology, and one area I'm really keen on expanding knowledge, awareness, and involvement in is the data. And when we get to the AI question, that's going to be a key part of that. So I feel until or unless there's much more collaboration and advancement in understanding data, we're going to continually be hampered. And one really good example is open source intelligence, so OSINT, is that how you say it? Yeah, and that's been seen to really drastically cut timelines and costs for various people, whether in a financial services firm or the intelligence services or government agencies. And not only has it cut the costs, it's increased understanding and consistency in terms of definitions. Then there's a better interface with the tooling that it plugs into. But most importantly, I think one bank quoted 30% increase in terms of the amount of fraud that was detected. So, yeah, pretty cool.
So I've always thought that outside of, say, Tazama Mojo Loop projects, if you think about it, anytime we don't have available information or available data, you have to start from scratch. That alone itself costs money. And if you look across board, some banks might be able to afford it. Some might really, really struggle to afford it. So, and if you look across jurisdiction, some jurisdiction might be able to afford it. Some might go the clever way of doing it. I think DeepSeek is one good example in that. But still, 5 mil is a lot of money. So open source to me still seems to be the hedge or the closest we can get to fighting financial crime, because it takes a good chunk of the cost away, good chunk of building it from scratch away. So everybody is almost like starting from a level playing field, and then you can start evolving from there. I think that would be a pretty good word if we're able to achieve that.
So for anybody who has come across open source tools, please do share with us. We spent a lot of time talking to other entities. If you haven't come across Move, they're a payments firm, but they also have open source core payments infrastructure. They've got a product called Watchman sitting under their tool. It does do help on the sanction screening. There's then 2 other agencies that give you access to data readily. Open Corporates, go find some people that you know and see if they're in there. It's amazing what you can find when you enter a name into Open Corporates. The other is Open Sanctions. They've got a complete list of all the sanctions and watch lists that exist. So if you're into financial services and wondering, well, hang on, this is all expensive data. No, it isn't. There are news agencies that want access to this, so they pay for this stuff to be made available. So there are tools, but please do come to us at the end if you're aware of others. You help us so we can start growing it. So from that perspective. In terms, though, of open source and collaboration and the transformation it can bring, are you seeing a growing increase of this amongst your client base, or is it one of those areas that's nice aspirational, but people want to keep this stuff to themselves? How are you seeing that as part of the world of the collaboration helping transform, the banking and the payments infrastructure? You want to go first?
Yeah. I think good examples that comes to mind is transaction monitoring Netherlands. For some reason, there is huge interest in developing around transaction monitoring more. And what they've done is a coalition of about 5 banks decided to share data and leverage their common data to fight financial crime. You can imagine how rich they will be able to combat this challenge, leveraging each other's data. Just to give you some backdrop, a criminal mind would try each one of these banks to see whether they can penetrate their financial crime solutions or their offerings. And when they are unsuccessful, they would try another one. You can imagine one of them becomes successful, and they will pass that information around to say, try Bank B, not Bank A. Bank A already have that. And then when Bank B blocks it, they go to C, D, E, F. So they are trying, and what the banks are doing is playing catch-up. So you can imagine when you form that team, what you've literally said is you can only try all of us one time. Second time, we've learned, we move on. And that is one great example that I've seen in fighting financial crime, especially with data sharing. And I think there is opportunity in that for us to learn as a community, because just like he shared when we were talking earlier on, if we don't have global collaboration in fighting this, our differences, which are natural, bring some intuitions which someone sitting in London will not know how someone in Brazil or someone in Africa or someone in India will think about crime and think about how to penetrate your system. But you can imagine someone in those countries who's part of open source, who have the same kind of or pattern of thinking, they can quickly come up with solutions, whilst here we might be racking our brain that this is impossible, or how does this happen? They can quickly understand how that challenge is. They can quickly bring the solution on the table. And the benefit of open source is that can be quickly implemented, not just with 5 banks, with hundreds of banks that we have here, for example, in UK, in Europe, and the US.
Any comments? Cool. Okay, so moving on, because we're in that strange area where we live under regulatory guidance and regulatory governance, a lot of the interactions with the regulators, unfortunately for those who saw the original agenda, Shelley is former FCA, so we're hoping to grab her insight. But unfortunately she's got COVID and we'd rather not share that with you. We share a lot, but not that. So Toye graciously stepped in. So this is a bit more of a complicated one in terms of regulators. So as a panel, in terms of regulatory bodies and their involvement and crossing that divide, I did a talk in Cape Town a couple of months ago, and I gave an analogy. It was recorded, so I had to be careful. But the regulators sit and they see new stuff coming from a fintech, and they're going, what on earth have these people done? what does this mean? So it's actually very difficult for them to understand the changes that are necessarily coming from a financial institution. But from your perspective, in terms of the regulators and how they could be brought on board and how that can move and accelerate things, thoughts on that would be helpful.
Thank you. So I think there's three aspects in terms of regulators. So firstly, regulators actually have quite a hard job, right? They get criticised a lot, and they certainly aren't without blame, but then who else is? So they are, at the end of the day, just people, and they've got a tough job. I reference back to that 2008 financial crisis, since which apparently, depending on which paper you read, there's been a 700% increase in regulation. I think that's quite modest if you think about the cross-cutting rules and the cross-jurisdictional aspect. But any which way round, it's a lot more regulation and lower budgets with which to fight. To meet the regulations. So regulators are going to be impacted by that. The attention and focus on AI as well as crypto and other areas of regulation, that's only going to make the problem worse. So they have a hard job to do. The other aspect is they are actually very active, in the FCA, not least. They've done a huge amount in terms of innovation, sandboxes, hackathons, and just different types of innovation. I think they just launched their AI hub last week. Some would say, shouldn't they be doing more regulating than innovation? But it's they do have a dual agenda, and it's good to see them, active, and that will increase the understanding. The third aspect is where we really want to see over the next 1+ years is taking that next step. So a lot of vendors will say, we want the regulators to endorse us because that will help unlock some of the challenges we see. But it's a difficult position for them to take. But I think there is a very valid area where they, can help, and that's with private-public partnerships. So we're starting to see some of those, and the all-parliamentary, is it APPGs? Yes, different kind of forums for where they're taking a much more active role. So I think that's the three key areas.
So I think when it comes to the regulators, they are in an incredibly difficult position, especially now. If in the past they were in 1.0 trouble, I think they are in 5.0 trouble now. And it's due to the fact that the landscape is changing significantly. So if we look at the structure, you have the government, then you have the legislators, then you have the regulators who are custodian of those legislations. And how do you sort of regulate what you don't know? So that's one in financial crime. Then how do you regulate a very dynamic environment that you don't even understand, or the world itself don't understand? Take AI, for example. We might say HUA Act, for example, is comprehensive and probably the most comprehensive in the world. But I can tell you as of today, it looks like it was designed 5 years ago in the eyes of criminals, because now they know what to do exactly on how to beat it. So what do you do? Do you bring out another regulation very quickly? Do you increase enforcement? And plus the challenge is that they're also human, which means they're just like us, trying to learn this new technology, how does it work, then think about what do we do to regulate it. And to Sarah's point, solutions are coming out, let's say, on a weekly or on a monthly basis. You created a sandbox. And the essence of the sandbox, thanks to the FCA, is to experiment. How do you sort of regulated entity would want to lean on you to give them the signal that this is a good solution for them to use? But the regulators can do that also, because now they will be rubber stamping a solution, which means if you use it and it fails, which means you've transferred your risk through that solution and you have not owned your risk. You want to say the regulators told us. How do they do their job without compromising their stance, which is keeping the market integrity, ensuring that each customer is treated fairly, and ensuring that there is no loophole in the financial market. How did they do that? It's a very complicated question for them, and I bet it even gets more complicated. We're only talking about AI now, and there is quantum, which we've talked about earlier on. There is metaverse, which it's already happening. It's not the future. You can pay on metaverse and buy things on metaverse today. How do they regulate those things? So it's so many things for the regulators to think about.
Any thoughts from you, Joseph? We're very regulatory heavy on this point. We're about to turn to you in a moment, so you're okay. But any thoughts on the regulatory side, or?
I just want to talk about the self-hosted sandboxes, actually. So as a software engineer, it is very hard to deploy and use sandbox environments, especially when you work with the customers. When you try to deploy, there are many challenges, right? But in open source, it's so easy. You don't need to jump on a call with the business people. You can just go and read the code, read the documentation, and easily use it. Probably it's much easier than other things.
Part of that conversation, I don't know if you were in the Mojaloop presentation earlier, but the reality is that there aren't data centers in these countries. You're dealing with the most sensitive. There's two things that governments protect: communications and finances. Do mobile money, they really love you. You do both. They don't know what to do with you. But that whole problem of data centers, the lack of their availability, running them and hosting them locally, is fundamental because they don't know where that data is. We've seen data protection regulation in Europe. Moving though on to dependency on an open source solution. I'll start with the complicated, and I briefly alluded to with abstraction being your friend in the open source, but can you just raise some of the challenges of working and building an open source solution? You had 2 years of sheer pain, you've forked, you've had arguments, please share more in terms of the challenges of building an open source solution and some of the opportunities that presented as well.
Apart from Tazama, I also built some open source products that used by some African banks. What I realized that you can easily customize open source projects and integrate into your product. But when you encounter any specific problem, there is no one that can help you easily. You have to open a GitHub issue and wait for a long time. But it's not the case when you use closed source products. Let's say you're on AWS and you use one of the AWS resources. You can easily jump on a call with the AWS support team. But that's not the case for open source. I think that's a big challenge.
The delays potentially in waiting for that person to get to it, or enough plus ones for it to be the top of the pile.
Yes.
Especially when they're not paying for it. But that's a different conversation. The other part then is security, the balancing the security challenges. You're dealing with highly sensitive information, and clearly there's some big question marks about, well, how safe is open source? You can see the code, but that means you've got to go look at the code. So any thoughts on the security and some of the things you need to address there?
Yeah, I think it was 6 months ago. There was an open source contributor raised a pull request that contains malicious code, and they just merged with the LGTM. Looks good to me. They even didn't know that it was a malicious code. Yes, when you have an open source product, you can get contributions from all around the world, but it doesn't mean you can check everything, because some of the tools have more than 1,000 contributors. How can you check it? It's so hard. There are some automated tools, but it's not enough. So I think that's the main challenge.
From a business perspective then, from Sarah and Toye, thoughts on the security and the challenges?
So obviously security is very top of the agenda for regulators, and the risk personnel within the business. And this is where I think we were talking earlier, isn't it, about the gap between business and technology within any organisation. So levels of understanding, vary a lot. And if you're on the board or C-suite of a bank, for example, you're going to feel quite lonely. And also scratching your head a lot in terms of, is my CTO or CIO or CISO telling me what I need, or like how, they're just spouting all these acronyms and what do you do? So I think that's one of the biggest issues, and the risks faced by an organisation are many, but the watchword is resilience. So I think that's where, as an industry and other industries as well, need to get stronger, having very sort of simple to implement and maintain resilience frameworks. And then that's how you can bridge this gap in terms of some of the security issues with open source, because they're certainly not insurmountable, but it's having the right wraparound.
Yeah, I think I would just contribute on the wraparound. And this is my imagination around it. The key challenge which Joseph has talked about and which Sarah did point to is specifically around not having the right set of people who can check the security. And if you do have it, because you have to wait for them to do it at their leisure, because it's open source, it's free service. I think there should be sort of a credit system or something that reward every effort that is in it. So I could imagine in closed source, what's the difference? There's a lot of money if you have a solution, and a solution that works because you're solving a problem. And I think that should be transferred to open source in a way. When a solution from open source is being implemented, the contributors should also have certain things that, quote unquote, is a reward that they get. And it gives them the opportunity to keep contributing, because it changes from just leisure. As we all know, we are busy people, and creating time to specifically look at someone else's problem somewhere around the world could be challenging. But if there is a benefit attached to it, no matter how small, aside doing that good, there is that willingness to contribute more. And I also think maybe this is where that coalition could work a lot. If, for example, say, just like the Transaction Monitoring Netherlands invested in their open closed source, we'll call it, is open to just 5. If that sort of investment is available, for example, for the whole of Netherlands, for example, I could imagine how impactful that would be for developers in Netherlands to contribute to open source. So I could imagine the billions and billions financial institutions spend on developing solutions or adopting solutions. If there is a common goal where they co-develop, they co-deploy, that will significantly reduce cost. That cost can be put back into things like open source to help those who are contributing to it.
So we're now going to move on to the AI question, and as I mentioned earlier, the debate is your AI is as good as your data. I worked in a bank that sued a regulator. The best thing you can do as a bank is sue the person who monitors you. They won in court, so that's all good, and then they can now run an AI-driven bank. The funny part of that is when the first baby version of that AI was released, it spotted that my team didn't like Italians. My team were all Italians, so it's a bit worse than it sounds. They were seeing and being more stringent with their fellow countrymen than they were anybody else. So the AI and what it picks up on can open some weird biases. The problem, and the FCA tried to do this with their first digital sandbox, we tested Disarm, we found some issues, but we did notice the data wasn't very useful. So from that perspective, there's a debate you'll see me driving in the AI stream. Personally, I would love to open source everyone's payments data so we can monitor it. Anyone else up for that? I don't know. Don't think so. But from a process and an approach, getting access to good quality data, what approaches are you seeing? I think the FCA have done some, but...
Yeah, so the problem which we've had in the past, it's almost like growing up being a bad child. You technically be a bad adult, except there is a change in trajectory. It's the same for financial services. We've had problems with having good data, having good clean data, then having good, clean, usable data. Then the final top of it is sharing that data. So we have an inherited problems which we need to find a way of resolving. Again, unfortunately, it has to another layer of the challenges which we are facing. And you can see in this new world of AI, you can see that has already been very evident, from biases to fairness and all of those things which we've had in the past. So how do we go about it? I think open source gives us one leg in, because if you look at the DeepSeek, which we mentioned earlier on, it's a huge game changer. So you can imagine that what cost hundreds of billions of dollars or pounds to build, someone that was able to do it with 5. And I bet in some other part of the world, someone is inspired that I can probably be able to do it with maybe 10 grand, 20 grand. So I think if we have opportunity to, if we start cleaning our data, if we start sharing our data, if we start having this data available across board, it will be something useful, especially for the AI, to close the gap.
I've got 5 minutes. I've got one last question, so I'm on track. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, doing well. Any other thoughts on the data? I've got one final question that we can then run off, and if we have a little bit of time, might open up for others. But what are the limitations of relying heavily on AI-driven systems? Things that are starting to appear already. We hear about hallucinations. Well, we all hallucinate, but the AI can have some fun ones. I can share a very good response if people want.
Yeah, I just wanted one more thing on that. So when we talk about classical open source codes, it can be either open and closed, right? But it's a bit different for the AI models. You can open source AI model and you can have a single binary file. You can run it, but you will never see what's inside of it. The question is, do they release open weights? So open weights is kind of mathematical representation of the AI character. How do they train it? That's why DeepSeek is special. They open weights as well.
I'm not going to let you talk to Amanda. She'll tell you off because she will say that's not a definition of open source, but we'll have that debate. Any other comments from the rest of the panel? If not, we'll open.
Yeah, just one. So I think we go back to the gap between adoption and understanding. So that's a phrase stolen from the opening plenary. What did Amanda say? The scale of adoption is so unmatched with the scale of understanding. And this is kind of like a really big elephant in the room. Everyone wants to get ahead of the curve in terms of AI, but there's a real risk of that gap being there. And in terms of bias in data, we really need to address that and contribute to a position where we start eliminating that bias by getting involved, by providing opportunity to correct some of the biases. Yeah, and the other aspect is testing, and we need to develop an understanding across industries of what questions to ask. People are inherently bad at asking questions. We tend to trust what we're given, and that needs to stop.
I think we're timed out. Is that it? We have a minute. Oh, wow, look at us. We're all organised. Just as a call to action, if people are interested in building an AI in financial services, please do talk to us. We do have mandate to build that this year from the Linux Foundation and the Gates Foundation. We had the running joke that Bill Gates said, "Why didn't you start with an AI?" We didn't have any data. It's not rocket science. Come on, be serious. But Bill Gates is that level of push that we have to build it. So we are building that this year. So if you are interested and want to get involved, come and talk. That was it. We're done.